Okay, so there's Frank Zappa. Since there's going to be no Ion, as far as I know, this evening, there's not going to be a regular Payday, but probably the only artist and scientist equal to the challenge of replacing the intensities of Ion. It's Mr. Zappa. We just witnessed his high culture effort called Yellow Shack. Then we heard his low culture effort, Anyway the Wind Blows. And then we heard the, call it controlled chaos, disciplined anarchy, emphasizing the disciplined side more than the anarchy of the third piece, which is an excerpt from Call Any Vegetable, back in 1971, say. So we're going to do a Zappa special tonight, and we're going to include, at this point, I don't see Bert unless he's an anonymous, so we'll include Michael, who's a musician, so he might be qualified to engage. Roxy's here. Is that you, Roxy?
No, it is not.
Who's that? That's Sarah. Okay. And then we have this one, might be Roxy. Is that you, Roxy?
No.
Anybody there? Who is it?
This is Debbie.
Oh, Debbie. Yes, Debbie.
Hi, Debbie.
So we've got Alyssa. I think we got Alyssa. Right?
Greetings. Hello.
Hello, Alyssa. Glad
Good
to have
evening.
you aboard. You're a musician.
Hi, Debbie.
No,
Hi,
no,
Deb.
Deb's on mute. Deb is not a musician. Yeah, we're only making eligibility for musicians. So we're waiting for Roxy. So maybe she's still sleeping. I might have to call her and wake her up. Just to begin, Michael, what do you have to say about Frank Zappa?
Well, Bob, Frank Zappa, through you and your exposure that you've given us, has enabled me to listen to music in a different way. It's definitely opened my ears. And also, all what you've been showing us, how Frank is the hidden ground to so much of what we regard as our musical culture today.
Yeah, and of Iondom. He is certainly, I remember Sheila Kern back in 2010 or so, she didn't know anything about Zappa, so she watched a few interviews. I don't know if she listened to any music, and she said, and this was in the early days, she said, there's a guy who took his power. So she understood, he represented that in the 60s and 70s in pop culture. People wouldn't put it in those terms, but they certainly were impressed with his detachment, his integrity, his intelligence, his creativity, which is what we assume happens when you take your power. So I thought that was interesting that Sheila said that. And so, Alyssa, what do you make of Zappa?
Zappa, yeah, I also really got into Zappa because of you, Bob. Before that, I obviously was aware of him being in musician circles, and even when we were recording with Dave Neufeld, the drummer that we had recording on our record was a huge Zappa fan. So he and Dave would talk about Zappa like a lot. And when I heard it before talking to you and understanding more of it and taking the drop, it just sounded like circus music to me. But now, now I realize all the different tonalities that he's orchestrating, all of the background of his influences, bringing in the chemistry and the science and the understanding of the wave and versus the particle, and the big note, and how how you say he swallowed the environment of the TV and all these things and showed it through his musical expression as well as his directing of the album atmosphere as well as the concert. He was, like you said, I think you and Roxy, you're going to discuss that video tonight, but he was a pharaoh of his environment. And so I dig the humor a lot. He is technically super savvy. I remember being at South by Southwest, and we were playing a show at the Mohawk in Austin, Texas, and right next door, Dobbs, his son was playing, and so I could hear his music being played, and it was really, it's electrifying, and so yeah, he's definitely somebody that is a go-to now for music, for me, listening, getting a palate cleanser from all the other bullshit that's out there.
Right. So. No, that's good.
Yay, Zappa.
So,
yay.
So, but it seems that, Michael, was there much Zappa awareness in South Africa when you were young?
There was, Bob. I was actually introduced to Zappa when I was about 16 years old, when I was at boarding school. And the only people that were listening to Zappa were the kind of the dropouts and the crazies. And that's how Zappa was introduced, through Joe's Garage and albums like that. So we were aware of him, but it wasn't something that I would have moved towards unless I'd been educated about it.
Right. So Zappa is such a huge thing, huge elephant in the room, that you need a good museum guide like myself, yours truly, to point out what you didn't notice. And I guess that applies to Alyssa, too. She was aware of Zappa, but had no clue what he was doing.
I didn't know he was a composer, Bob. I didn't know he was a composer. That I don't know why that legitimized him for me, but that really helped me understand before what I just interpreted as zany compositions. When I listened to Perez and I listened to other stuff, and I've been a John Cage fan for a while, but that really helped me understand how to hear his music. He was composing. It was composition. It wasn't just rock. It was he was composing the rock. Yeah, he was composing the rock environment. He wasn't just like, oh, I'm really electrified by like rock and roll. It's like that wasn't what he was doing. It was part of what he was doing.
Yes, he said just before he died, he was working with his Ensemble Modern, who was the first cut we heard Yellow Shark by. Ensemble Modern, a German group, I think. Or maybe there's non-Germans in there coming out of Europe anyways. He said he would want to tour with his rock band half the year, and then the other half the year tour with Ensemble Modern. So he wanted to be showing both modalities in his oeuvre, O-E-U-V-R-E, in his what I would call tetrad management. He was showing the battle between the different kind of cultures, and he called himself in cartoon form the Grand Wazoo, W-A-Z-O-O. You take that 1972 album, read the story in the liner notes, The Legend of Cletus Aurelius Auritus, something like that. Maybe it's Emperor, Legend of Emperor Cletus Aurelius Auritus. And he's describing the emperor as a Zappa guy. You can tell it's the personal statements about him are part of Zappa's biography, but it's mixed in with other stuff from 2,000 years ago, the Roman Empire. 2,000 years ago, it's a Roman Empire figure, approximately, or Babylonian or something, but he was aware of, that was his symbol for processing the whole world, which McLuhan said was what the serious artist did in the 20th century. He would process the whole environment, program the whole environment, everything that was in it, like Finning's Wake does. And Ulysses before that, Ulysses being a paler anticipation of Finning's Wake. And McLuhan did the same thing. McLuhan said that he would, when he wanted to confront the TV environment, he would look around and grab anything he said and use that, which is much like Zappa's slogan, anything, any place, any time, anywhere, for no reason at all. And in a way, the TV environment's that way. You don't know why they're broadcasting stuff. There's so many different items they have to fill up the air with. So they might have some obvious news stories they got from the New York Times, and then they're looking at a local pool hall and how they are vegetarians or something in the pool hall. Then they go to some other item. It's quite improvised, the TV environment, especially once they got into cable. Okay, so I'm going to play another music piece and get a hold of Roxy to see if she didn't wake up, because she was supposed to come in at this point. So let's. Anybody got any requests for Zappa? Anything they'd like? Black napkin, says Carolyn. Don't know if that is handy, Carolyn, right off. But, you guys got anything to say? You don't
Something
know?
from Apostrophe.
What, Michael?
Zappa's role as a conductor, we were talking about that last week, Bob, hand signals for the blind, how he also reflects the scientist who includes themselves in the experiment, who doesn't exclude themselves. And that's shown now where people replicate Zappa, but cannot replicate his presence on stage or his interaction with the environment that his audience that he was engaged with.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, here's a piece that might be lumped into his classical genre, serious music, in quotes, serious music, conducting music, called Radenzo. So, what'd you think of that? Is that what you were looking for, Alyssa?
Yes. I
I
enjoy hearing his compositions. Does he have many albums of the composing of the ensemble?
There's 2 or 3 albums. He had the London Symphony do stuff in the 70s. Some orchestra in the LA area in the mid-70s. Then he had the London Symphony, I think it was, in the early 80s. Then Jean Boulez, forget his first name, Pierre Boulez, he did some stuff at his famous musical lab, avant-garde lab in Paris in 83. Then he got Ensemble Moderne late 80s, early 90s to do stuff. So those albums are sprinkled through his other rock albums and digital albums. Like he did, his wife Gail Zappa, was looking through Grove's Dictionary of Music one day, I guess back in late 70s, early 80s, and saw there was a Frank Zappa who was active in Europe from 1763 to 1788, a minor composer. So they found his scores, and maybe his name was Francesco Zappa, and they found
what?
Yeah. They found his scores somewhere in some library. So Zappa took that guy's music and put it through his synclavier. That was one of the first albums he did released made from the digital synclavier. So what's ironic is 63 to 88 is basically the 25-year period of Zappa. He shows up on Steve Allen doing the bicycle concerto in March 1963, and then he goes till his band is touring in summer of 88, and then the band cracks up. There's an argument among the musicians. So that was his last tour. So even though he lived another 5 years, his active period was 63 to 88, the same years as Francesco Zappa, 200 years later. Interesting. So Zappa had ionic synchronicity. Zappa had ionic synchronicity. Let me just say this, Michael. Zappa had ionic synchronicity happening in his life, or maybe even Xenochrony. Yeah, Michael, what?
Yeah, that piece you just played, Bob, it emphasizes Zappa's embrace of everything, because he's using scales from the Orient, which is strange to the ear of our ear. But also when you brought up xenocracy, that's something that we really got from Zappa. The feedback of the environment. Xenochrony.
Synchrony, xenochrony. Yeah, it's what? Something to do with the environment? What did you just say?
The feedback of the environment reflecting.
Right. That's right. Yes, Zappa used to talk about in late 60s, early 70s, the organism/environment. I think that's what he called it. Organism/environment, the interplay. So we now have Roxy here. So what'd you say? Check for Bert? Don't see Bert yet. So Roxy, we started off, I played Yellow Shark and I played anything, Any Way the Wind Blows, I think it is, or Anything. What was that? Anything? Anyways, and then we played the Rockin' Vegetable, Colony Vegetable, fantastic guitar. Running, sprinting, a guitar sprinting.
I'm not a vegetable anymore.
Okay, so I said, he had Yellow Shark is high culture. Anyway, Anything is a low culture in the old days, in the 50s and 60s, and then the running, dashing guitar solo from 1970-71 is controlled chaos, controlled anarchy, emphasizing the controlled side more than the anarchy. So those three types, we didn't go into it, but I know that's what you want to talk about, high culture, low culture. And then we talked about Michael's reason, what he thought of Zappa when he was young, and Alyssa, what she thought of Zappa when she was young. They both admitted that they didn't really get Zappa till they heard us talking about him and explaining him and playing stuff they never knew he made. And what grabbed Alyssa, sounds like you, Roxy, she said, when I found out that he was a composer, that really was important to me, that he wasn't just a guy jerking off with rock absurdity, that he had a method to his madness, I guess it meant, right, Alyssa? A composer angle to it.
It broadened his range, and it helped my ear understand. He would always have multiple tonalities running the melody lines, and that wasn't a normal rock sensibility to do. And so when I heard some of his composing, then it helped me understand what he was doing there as well.
Right. Now, what's interesting is that when Zappa was asked to define being a composer, he says, anything you do, and then you say it is art or music or composition. If you say something, like me, walk over there, caress Carol, walk back, and I say, that is a composition. Zappa says, that's valid. If you call it a composition, you are qualified to be a composer. Now, this is from a guy who made such complex compositions that really highly trained musicians couldn't play it. So he just didn't do simple stuff, though that was mixed in, like put out a cigarette in an ashtray. He actually said that, I think. If I stub my cigarette butt into an ashtray and then play around with the ash and call that a composition, it is. So that's, again, the freedom of creativity, as well as hyper-disciplined conceptual elaboration that his mind was capable of. So this is why people couldn't figure out what he was, since little people like to figure out whether you're this or that. He couldn't do that with Frank. So before we hear Roxy's seminar, or whatever she's going to tell us, qualified, that she's qualified to tell us, I want to say this, Roxy. I have this book, Cosmic Debris, by Greg Russo, R-U-S-S-O, and it's subtitled The Cosmic Debris, and then The Collected History and Improvisations of Frank Zappa. It's an incredibly detailed book, probably the most detailed book out there. But what he's done that I like is he has created an item that's all the way through the book called Conceptual Continuity, and he's actually calling it Randomonium. And then sometimes he'll have musical quotes. But I want to give you an example of what he writes, which we're going to use. We're going to go through in lull periods when we can't think of anything to say. We'll go to the next conceptual continuity, because this will show someone who's very familiar with all of Zappa's work what they have noticed repeated or probed or extended or developed in some way. So his very first entry, dealing with you can't put a time on it too much, but he says, two mothers of invention, but they were called the Mothers back then. The record industry told them when the first album came out, Freak Out in '66, that they can't just say mothers because that implied motherfuckers. So they had to add something, and so apparently some record executives came up with the Mothers of Invention, which Zappa accepted. And so it says two mothers, so that's early, pre-Freak Out recordings made at the Studio Z, Zappa studio that he bought from Paul Buff in Cucamonga, out in the boondocks. Two Mothers recordings made at PAL. It was called the PAL Studios before Frank called it Studio Z once he had bought it from Paul Buff or rented it. I can't remember what he did. Two Mothers recordings made at PAL. He took over the studio in some capacity. So maybe he... What's so funny, Carol?
You keep digressing.
That's all right. It's like a Zappa composition. So there is some receipt in the Dave Wally's first biography, so I guess he bought it. Two Mothers recordings made at PAL during the malt shop. Zappa in '64 was making a film called I Was a Teenage Malt Shop, featuring Captain Beefheart. And so during the malt shop sessions, two of them have not been released in any form. So two recordings from the malt shop sessions had not been released. They're called Rock Around the Clock and Sandwich Song. Then he says, Ned has a brainstorm. That's part. Ned is a character, I think, in I Was a Teenage Malt Shop. Ned has a brainstorm later became Toads of the Short Forest when re-recorded and released on the Weasels Rip My Flesh collection, which was in 1970, approximately, after he broke up the Mother's Invention. So Toads of the Short Forest, a translator, Simon Prentice, he translated Zappa into Japanese for that audience, and he also worked with Yoko Ono. But Simon was told by Zappa that Toads of the Short Forest referred to isotopes, which is a key word in iondom, because we take the hydrogen isotope 197 and turn it into something new and powerful. We basically stabilize the hydrogen isotope. So isn't that interesting that Ned has a brainstorm? I guess the music, maybe not the lyrics, becomes Toads of the Short Forest. And this is what Zappa fanatics notice, the altering of old cliche stuff that he has stuck in his trunk that he hasn't looked at for years. He goes through the trunk, he pulls out something, and then he makes it something new, or he finds it useful. Then it says, the song I Was a Teenage Malt Shop involves Zappa's earliest known use of the infamous hippie riff. That's in quote, hippie riff. And it says, a lick that Frank used to signify a hippie presence in a song. This was its only use on... So he would play the musical riff to, or section or small part to indicate hippies were around in the lyrics. This was signaling, hand signals for the blind. This was its only use on piano. And then Greg Russell says, listen for the riff on the song's Flower Punk, which was his satire of the 1967 flower power movement in San Francisco. Listen to it in the other song, My Guitar Wants to Kill Your Mama, which was done around that time. And then the long composition musical called Great Peccary, and another one called Honey, Don't You Want a Man Like Me. All those have the hippie riff in them. Then it says, the riff made its apparent debut on Jackie DeShannon's famous, jazz guy, on Jackie DeShannon's April 1963 recording of Needles and Pins. Unless that's a pop song. Needles and Pins was done by Dave Clark 5, maybe. So, maybe Jackie DeShannon is not a jazz person. But the riff made its apparent debut on Jackie DeShannon's April 1963 recording of Needles and Pins, on which session guitarist Carol Kay honored arranger Jack Nietzsche's request. Now, Carol Kay, she's a famous session bass player who and other instruments, who is part of the famous Wrecking Crew they made the documentary on. And I played a quote from her once the documentary came out 15, 20 years ago, whenever, and she complained that they were never called the Wrecking Crew and exposed the guys who made the documentary and why many of her colleagues in the actual Wrecking Crew did not cooperate with the documentary. But Carol Kay is listed on Freakout as one of the 179 people who had an influence on Frank. Frank knew enough and was involved with the music industry in Los Angeles in the early 60s that he knew and counted as a friend Carol Kay, which is pretty neat.
Jackie DeShannon, Bob, she did Put a Little Love in Your Heart and What the World Needs Now. She covered that song.
Very good songs. Okay, so she's a pop singer. And so it's interesting, the riff comes from there, on which Jack Nietzsche was a famous producer back then, and I think he ended up doing the doors for Elektra Records, the Elektra record company. So you've got Jack Nietzsche asking session guitarist Carol Kaye to do something, to do a riff, something, for Jackie DeShannon's 1963 song, and then Zappa took that and filtered it through his songs when he wanted to indicate a hippie. So that's the kind of, detailed investigation that Greg Russo does, and many other Zappa people. That you go to the Zappa forums, fan things, what would they call, all Frank Zappa .fan something in the 90s, those kind of places. There were a lot of Zappa fans who would make a big effort to find these kind of things. So that's showing you the larger conceptual continuity, the larger project, that all his music is one composition. So it's like Finnegan's Wake, a huge book with references, cross-references all the way through the book. So you're always in the middle of the book. So with Frank, you're always in the middle of the big note, the big composition. So this is what we're going to go through and annotate these conceptual continuity motifs. So I've said what I wanted to say there. Roxy, you wanted to begin the theme. You want to take it over for a minute?
Yes. Well, we were talking about how Zappa and many artists sort of channel things that are to come. They may not understand what they're really doing, but they show what's coming. And there have been many examples, like Goethe in Faust talks about how somebody creates money, then after a year becomes sand. And that's the time where fiat money is born, created.
Yes. With the pretty press.
Yes, and Zappa erased the boundary between high and low culture. For him, there was no, this division didn't exist, and he considered with the same importance, the high culture creations and popular culture creations, like Marshall McLuhan will give the same importance to all technologies.
Right. It's also the commercial versus high art or serious non-commercial art. He reduced them, collapsed them into his statement, we're only in it for the money. He's not putting down music for being commercial. That doesn't make it any less important.
Yes, and in a way, that's very ironic, because Ian has always quoted, especially not only pop songs, but TV programs. And this is the concept of the big work, the big cooking. And Zappa was always referring to the kitchen, to the substances, and to his concept of conceptual continuity, where everything is part of a big body of work, it's a big creation.
Yeah.
And it's not only the creation of individual artists, but the creation of all humans that are collaborating in this big cooking. And we were saying, yes, it's a very complex recipe. And we created like the Gutenberg Galaxy. Then we left that cooking for a while. Then we added other medias. And then you brought Ion forth. And this changed reaction.
We perfected the kitchen. Here in Ion, we made the perfect food, finally. The food that can be a medicine at the same time. And all
yes, and everything is part of the recipe and of the end result. And that's the amazing thing with Zappa. On the 22nd of February, the Ensemble Modern played the Yellow Shark and
in Berlin.
Great Peccary and other compositions that were created for them in collaboration with Frank Zappa. And they had a talk before the concert. Yes, I don't know if you can you play Vimios?
Play what?
Vimios? I don't know if you want to hear.
I can play stuff. What's Vimios?
Yeah.
The Vimeo.
Oh, Vimeo. Okay, can you send it to me? Have you got that handy to send right away? Yeah, but it's in different places. I don't know. Let me see. We're talking about which one? There's several videos from that concert you put together.
It's the second one. It's a talk.
Oh, the talk. Right.
In which three of the original members of the Ensemble Modern that worked with Zappa talk about how it was to collaborate with Zappa.
Great. So we're going to play it in German, and we'll stop it periodically, and you'll translate for us.
Yes, every time you see the new team, like the comic showing a new
Yes,
team,
the transition point. Yeah, I can stop and you can explain what happened. So are you getting ready to send it to me?
Yes.
So while we're waiting, Zappa didn't make Gregory Peccary for the Ensemble Modern. It was made 20 years before. It's on just another band from L.A. I think that's the band, the album it's on, Gregory Peccary. So it's about a market designer, a trend monger, a trend advertising agency, and Gregory Peccary is the little rodent that runs it and has all this charisma, and then he gets attacked by a bunch of hippies out in the woods. Sort of like a Charles Manson scene. What'd you say?
He cracks me up. He cracks me up with his hippie stuff.
Well, see, he was on the general vague pop culture level in the media, everybody thought that he was the king hippie, that he started it almost. And he objected to that. He says, we are not hippies. I am not hippie. I don't agree with him. He was interviewed right at the peak of... He was a freak. And that meant they were very conscious about their image and what they wore. Whereas the hippies were trying to retrieve, the San Francisco hippies were trying to retrieve spontaneity and casualness and informality. They didn't like the corporate rigidity. Well, Frank wasn't into corporate rigidity, but he certainly wasn't going to walk around unaware of the effects of his clothing and his words. He was ionic. He was interested in showing an awareness of the technologies you use and how to orchestrate them. So what was I saying about Gregory Peccary? Oh, yes.
And also to illustrate what Roxy said about bringing in the future. You know, he took someone like George Duke, who was a very accomplished jazz pianist. First he made him play straight-up chords, which infuriated George Duke for a while because he didn't want to go simple. And then he lumped this big machine in front of him, the synclavier, and said, "Start playing with that. That's what's going to happen." And in that way, he also took on a bit of a guru role emulated the guru role of opening up the disciples or his musicians.
Yeah.
He knew how to open his musicians up to their true potentials.
Yeah, I think he had ESP in some way. He does refer to ESP occasionally, but he had incredible insight into people. And when I first met him, I noticed his eyeballs you'd be looking at him, and in his eyeballs would spiral, that cliche image of the spiraling eye, the circles come out of a cosmic eye, you might see old...
like a swirl.
A swirling, it's concentric circles coming out of an eye was a cliche image in the 50s of someone who was interdimensional or psychic. Sometimes I look at Zappa, and sometimes I thought his eyes were spiraling at me. It was very intense, just talking to him and observing him. So you were saying that about the synclavier.
Yeah, did you got the video?
Not yet. No, I didn't get it. So try it again. Yeah, it did not come.
It's on your Facebook, Bob.
No, now it just came.
No, that's another one.
Yeah, this just came. Okay, I was going to say about this. You bring in Michael, the George Duke, the Anticipating the Future, but So in the height of Haight-Ashbury, in the summer of '67, when the whole world was trying to, at least in the pop culture and media world, was trying to show their allegiance to the hippies or to blow them up. And many people in the youth culture were wanting to get to San Francisco, and they thought the light shows that Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters were putting on was the greatest new art form ever. You take your LSD and wallow around in the light, sound, and light show. Right in the middle of it, Zappa says, "This is so ugly, I wish it would go away tomorrow." So here's this guy who people think is part of that culture. No one said that they wanted it to go away. You either accepted it or adjusted to it or liked it. But he said, this is incredibly ugly, this stuff. And so nobody knew what's better than this, Frank? And he made an effort to present music that was better than the corny Trips festivals or corny Grateful Dead or Jefferson Airplane. And nobody, because his albums weren't showing that yet, they didn't know what he could do in actual live concerts. It's when the bootlegs came out later, you heard how he was playing in '68. Like, look at those videos of somebody mentioned King Kong. Oh, yeah, Andrew Crystal did an essay on the Menippean satire of King Kong. So I posted, as a Menippean gesture, because he doesn't like Frank Zappa, I posted his article. Well, first of all, it was posted by Anna Livy Purbro and was taken down. And I suspect Andrew said, "I'm not letting Bob see that article." So I knew where it was, so I put it back up. And I presented 2 or 3 versions of Frank doing King Kong, 1968 on British TV, and a concert in Germany, and another concert in Paris. Incredible avant-garde mixtures with incredible jazz rock stuff before jazz rock, plus R&B stuff, and then some of his musicians making ridiculous noises and childish stuff in the mix of it all. That's 1968. The Jefferson Airplane are just starting to be known. Grateful Dead just starting to be known. Zappa's already, with this tremendous composition, King Kong, on TV, outdoing anybody. And he was doing better than Roland Kirk and the Jazz Guys or Archie Shepp. So nobody knew that. Back then you had to have been in England to see the TV show. You had no way to get a copy of it. And so it wasn't until YouTube started coming out that everybody started to see what Frank was doing. So usually when he was interviewed, he wouldn't really be going on about what great concerts he did. He was talking about the issues of the day, how the LSD Tim Leary world was a CIA conspiracy. He was talking about MK Ultra before anybody knew about MK Ultra, and he made that part of his Uncle Meat movie in '69. And but he also be criticizing the American culture and running for president, or having a surrogate, Tom Wilson, run for president in 1968. Look what he was doing. And nobody knew it unless you were around, Frank, because the media didn't talk about it. And you had to read a Rolling Stone article, and the Rolling Stone article Zappa always resented. They did a bad job, and there was enmity between Rolling Stone magazine and I guess Jan Wenner and Zappa from that point on. So he certainly was a hidden environment in the old terms. Okay,
How
so
old
I'm
was
saying,
he?
And he was using ridiculousness to hide himself too, Bob. So if you couldn't get past what appeared to be ridiculous, like you do the same thing, you use ridiculousn's to hide yourself. So it's like
right.
and then
Don't tell.
and then.
what did Alyssa say? Don't tell. Yeah, don't expose me there, Michael. Don't expose my methods. But what were you saying, Michael? Finish the thought.
Well, that's why he got tied in with maybe conspiracies like the Wrecking Crew and all of that, with the weird scenes at Laurel Canyon, and that is because of the ridiculousness. People couldn't see him and therefore became slightly suspect of him.
Well, he was satirizing the role of entertainment itself. So he would try to get away with the most ridiculous, non-entertaining, but it backfired. It always was greatly entertaining because Roy Estrada, Jimmy Carl Black, Don Preston, the members of the original Mother's Invention, were very idiosyncratic, eccentric people that were funny just in themselves. I mean, Roy Estrada would come on and he'd go, ew! In the middle of this amazing composition. and it sort of turned into
From the beginning, the first album is called Freak Out, and just like Zappa said, he was putting his audience on, that he was provoking people to go beyond their program and to raise these boundaries between the high and the low cultures.
Yeah.
And especially in the academic circles, this division is really taken very seriously.
In Germany, Rocky this is very big in Germany, this division. You don't mess with it. And that's what's funny about the Ensemble Modern. These German musicians didn't understand this guy, how frivolous he seemed to be sometimes. Go ahead, Roxy. What were you saying?
The freak out is this erasing these boundaries between the value of what is relevant, what is serious, what is important in art, and
what is commercial and what isn't. Okay, McLuhan at the time was saying that, listen to this, Rox, he was saying that government, culture, and business were all one. The headline was, cultures are business. So he was predicting the word that makes the market, and the word was made up of all the different institutions, specialist institutions in society, but they were all under the word that makes the market. Frank was taking that on, and when we interviewed him, he said he read a science fiction book in high school. I don't remember the story. He might say what it is in the interview. I don't think he did. He said that it was about a future condition where you just had to know one word. If you knew one word, you were a functioning member of society. So he was actually pointing out the streamlining effect of a post-verbal society in his innocent teenage way, but it was the same concept as McLuhan saying, government, culture, and education and business are one, which today is reflected in the crisis in Hollywood, where Ian points out that President or the White House influences the banks who influence the loans to Hollywood, so that Hollywood has to be access to their big monies to make their big movies. So there is where government, culture, and business are united. And Zappa understood that, and that was his message. And he shows it in some of his writings and non-musical theatrical presentations in 69-70. He had a pretty good intuition of the fusion of media. So, what did you say that made me say that? It's not just high culture and low culture. It's the division between art and commerce. And McLuhan wrote that in the 40s. The old Gutenberg humanitarian or humanist art forms did not want to be crass capitalism or crass business. So they created division.
That's the nonsense of Wittgenstein.
Sidney Finkelstein, the Communist Party.
McLuhan because he says advertisement is taking talented artists to make commercial art instead of creating real art. Yeah, real art and critical art. And Sidney Finkelstein was assigned by the Communist Party to do a hit job on McLuhan. But he also, I don't know if maybe it's in one of our Roxy videos, but I found out reading this book by Craig Russell that Sidney Finkelstein wrote the liner notes for the Edgar Varese album, which featured ionization on it, in the early 50s, and that was the first critical musical interpretation or analysis that Zappa read as like a 13-year-old, was Sidney Finkelstein, who 15 years before his book on McLuhan, which came out in 1968, here was Sidney already trapped within Dobbstown and didn't know it, that he would be writing for the important things that would show how wrong he and the Communist Party were. So that's a nice synchronicity. So what were we just saying about Sidney Finkelstein, and why did you bring him up? Because I was going to say another point. Well, it's like...
art and commerce.
Adorno
Let me say this.
And LaRouche are saying mass culture is a way of controlling society and dumbing society down to better control them.
Through what?
And,
through commerce?
Through low culture and Zappa,
pop culture. Well,
in a way, his activism was to educate the public and bring in, for example, Varese to a rock audience. That's right.
And so McLuhan wrote about the division between art and commerce was not viable under electronic conditions. It was true under Gutenberg printing press conditions, but not under the new electronic implosion, because actually the content is not as important as the form, the radio form, the movie form, the TV form itself. It was more radical than any content. So content just became an obsolete, whoever could pay the payola to get on there and have a hit song or be on a PBS, Mastery Theater, whatever it's called, Mastery Theater Playhouse, and, play some Shakespeare. They all were squashed up and minor art forms compared to art, if you define it as a teaching machine. The art environments, the media environments were the new teaching machines. So Joyce understood that, Wyndham Lewis understood it, McLuhan, and then Zappa, and then Ion. And Ion is actually solving any disservices from that situation where the word makes the market. But so right there in the middle of the hippie world, you've got everybody celebrating Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and Zappa takes that cover and does a satire on the design of Sgt. Pepper, and the Beatles objected to it, at least Paul McCartney did. So it got delayed for a year, so it didn't come out until 6 months after the Haight-Ashbury Summer of Love fad. But when it came out, what was it called? We're Only in It for the Money. And so this is being said by a guy who was the least interested in money in the cliche way that is vulgar that all the other bands were. They got their money.
He was completely...
Yeah.
He was completely immune to audience magnetism, Bob. So Zappa wasn't doing what he thought the audience or the listeners might want. He would go into the kitchen, cook something up, and just feed it to them. which wasn't how the popular culture was behaving at the time.
Well, he was not only feeding it, he'd make sure it attacked them. He wanted to be an outsider, manipulative satirist. So in We're Only for the Money, he's the one guy.
When he says that, we're only here for the money, he's already showing, he's provoking these people like Adorno or LaRouche.
Yeah,
and
Adorno was the theoretician of culture for the Marxists.
He was really in the knowing of how the market works, distribution, and how things had to have concision and limited formats so that things cannot be so complex. You have to make very short pieces, and the text has to be simple.
A lot of these great songs I play from that period, the R&B, they're like 2 minutes and 30 seconds long. They're so short, 2 minutes and 30.
The songs only have 3 chords and only one type of tempo. And so he says, we're only here for the money, but then he's making very complex music. So he's really in the knowing of what's going on.
Right,
and,
well, those bands, every one of those bands that made it big. What?
It's a type of cultural activism to re-educate the public with more complex and with humor, and to erase this fragmentation in art.
Okay, let me before I forget, add to that. In the late '60s, the Led Zeppelin, well, they didn't come until '69, but the Yardbirds, every famous band of the Eric Clapton and all these guys of that period, the late '60s, early '70s, most of them became drug addicts and didn't really keep their charisma going as constant as Zappa did. And they would start studying Aleister Crowley or get into Satanism. What, Carolyn?
Bert's here.
I noticed that. Yeah, we're going to get to you, Bert.
We'll get to you, Bert.
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn, for that notice. And so the thing was that here's Zappa. He's saying, don't take drugs. They'll ruin your gallbladder and kidneys. He did voice things. This is when it was very uncool to be anti-drugs, I mean, at least among the baby boomer generation. So he is taking his money and funneling it in to do orchestral compositions for big orchestras. He was immediately plowing his money back into his own creativity, which he couldn't stop. Couldn't stop thinking up new music. He said he went on vacation one time back then, and he holed up in a hotel. His wife was trying to get him to relax, and he made about 3 compositions. It just kept coming through him. So it's kind of like a channeling. The other thing is that Ralph Gleason was the famous pop culture critic in San Francisco, and he was the authority on great jazz and serious music as a newspaper critic. He wasn't an academic. When he first saw Zappa and the Mothers, he said, these are a bunch of advertising executives trying to infiltrate pop culture, the youth market, to rip everybody off. That's how the perception, the average perceptions couldn't see the present. They couldn't see what Zappa was. He thought they were a bunch of advertising executives pretending to be hippies and were disgusting and made terrible music. Ralph Gleason died within a year or so after saying that, so I'm pretty sure Non-Physical nailed him for getting Zappa all wrong. And and that guy, Ralph Gleason, became the big advisor and mentor to Jan Wenner of Rolling Stone. So no wonder Jan Wenner never got it right eventually. I mean, he had the wrong mentor, Ralph Gleason. So these are stories that only I know at this late stage. Nobody knows this stuff. So I'm going to unmute Bert, and then we'll get back to Roxy's dissertation. Okay,
well,
so go ahead.
Yes, I would like to say that Zappa starts saying on her Freak Out album, we're only here for the money, but every time he will reinvest a lot of money in rehearsing, in buying new equipment, in hiring the best musicians, in after hiring orchestras and then also promoting the work of people. And he wanted to go on promoting and recording people that he was not appreciated, and he knew the music was really interesting, and he's also
he promoted
the only
other people.
rock artist that when he says, how did you become a rock star or interested in music, he says he heard a piece by Edgar Varese called Ionization. So that's really like there we have
he heard Bob.
Connection.
I'm sure me and Ofenau we knew him back then. See, this is the interesting thing. Little I know that Ofenau would sneak out of me and creep over to Zappa's home in Lancaster and mind control him while I was just hanging at the local hotel on business. So there could have been, just like Ian said, Ofenau and me influenced Dylan in the mid-'70s when he met Patti Smith at CBGB. So, but back to your saying, Zappa, Arthur Coker said the fad in the 60s was pop sociology. McLuhan was seen as a sociologist, describing what was going on. Everybody wanted to know what was happening in society, which we would call, what's your sociological view of what's happening. So pop sociology was the trend. So Zappa was in that. His albums were designed to show what was happening. Lita Eliscu, a very bright woman who wrote for Walter Boer, Cecil Each Other, when Uncle Meat came out, around that time, she said, this is the State of the Union address from Frank Zappa. She understood that Frank was trying to sum up the culture. And so sociology is what Frank and McLuhan appear to be doing at that time, expressing sort of trying to show a hidden ground, different points, but the sociological part of Frank is important at that time. And he also was a musicologist, and he would sabotage the seriousness of sociology by recording a mental patient like Wildman Fisher. Right? That was considered sick that Zappa did that. He was exploiting this ridiculous street musician who, he tried to kill his mother and then be hospitalized on the Sunset Strip area every now and then. Why would Zappa record him? There was a legitimate criticism of exploitation, but I'm sure he had other reasons. He also promoted the groupie phenomenon and recorded these semi-musical groupies known as GTOs. He really was... they used to say that McLuhan was a sociologist of extreme phenomena. Baudrillard, continuing McLuhan's method, said that he analyzed extreme phenomena, even put it in his subtitles. But Zappa, I guess, could be lumped into someone studying extreme phenomena, fringe behavior. But the fringe behavior was always an indication of what was happening. If you want to know what's going on in the culture, look for the mutants, look for the sort of popular street-level artists and what they're trying to say. They're like slang. Slang is an indication of change. So gestural, behavioral performances are a kind of slang. So Frank was aware of that too. Always saying, fighting simple censorship because he would have swear words on his thing, but he also was highlighting sociological censorship and pointing out the slang of weird phenomena that express something. Like groupies were considered. Well,
he started that with that ionization album, Bob, by playing it to people to see their reaction to it.
Right.
And that
Studying the
continued
effect.
to be a theme right through. Mm-hmm.
That's right.
I sent you a video with the concert Zappa organized in honor of Edgar Varese, and I think it would be interesting just to listen the beginning. They start with Ionization, and Zappa presents the piece. Okay,
but just what Michael was saying. What was that thought, Michael? You just said,
that he when he used to play that ionization. Provoke them.
Yeah.
See what
provoke them.
What impact.
Yeah, and if you listen to the Zappa that comes through Ion around September 2nd, 2009, when got Ben Watson, who did a famous biography of Zappa, is on there, and he wants to talk to Zappa. The Zappa that comes through emphasizes that he was always trying to be, in effect, to be unpopular, to bug people. And when his albums became successful, it really pissed him off because he was losing the way to probe people and to do what he did with the Flores record in high school. So he was always presenting the record, the ionization record, with his bands and making them be different. He got really bad in the early 80s. You've listened to the album Man from Utopia. Some of the songs are damn bad, really stupid. We can maybe play a sample sometime to show you. So you're saying that, Michael, he's probing people using art. McLuhan said pop art is taking anything in your environment. The Warhol pop art, take anything in your environment and claim it's significant or art. So Zappa was taking that pop art motive and doing it more expertly, studying the effects on people. Yeah, I guess that's all. So can I play the German things, or do you want me to play the Varese first?
I think we should start with Varese because that's how he gets turned on into composing.
That's right. That's
and it's interesting how he talks about how he presents his favorite composer.
Right.
I think it's very, very touching that he organizes a concert in honor of his idol.
With Varese's widow, with Mrs. Varese. And, Varese had a home down in Washington Square in the Village, New York City's Greenwich Village area, and he got so pissed off at the music industry, he stopped making music for 25 years. I guess that's like 40s, 50s, and early 60s. And he lived in the Village, but he was a teacher to a lot of the upcoming avant-garde artists of the baby boomer generation. For example, Carol Lee Schneemann, who I met at the BAMP scene in December '97 at the conference the Barrel of Trinity put on. She was a secretary of Edgar Varese in the Village. She became the first female performance radical artist kind of thing. Look her up, Schneeman, Carol, I think it's Carole, Carol Schneemann. There was a church nearby where Varese lived called the Judson Memorial Church, where all the happenings in avant-garde New York scene of the early and mid-'60s happened. The minister there, I guess, was pretty hip, so he let everybody use his church. So I know that Zappa, when he got to talk about Varese, in my memory, he said the journalists were there to hear Zappa talk about Varese, and I think this is before the concert that you're talking about, which is around 1983, but this is back in the 70s or something. Zappa, he castigated the journalists, says, "You people suppressed this guy for 25 years. You had no clue that this was the greatest art of our time, the greatest music, and you guys drove him out of the industry." He really scolded the press, about Varese. So maybe we're going to hear that in what Roxy has sent me. Him doing that. So we have Bert's universal giggle, the universal gesture of greeting, Bert's giggle. Bert, do you have anything to say before? Have you heard everything or just came in late?
No, I heard everything. It's funny. Last week I didn't know that you were going to do Zappa, but I listened to a lot of Zappa last week. I listened to all the concerts, and it's really refreshing. I mean, it's when I was listening to it, it just captivated me. It's almost like it's watching television, but you're listening because it was so entertaining. The music, the concerts, and how he tuned the audience. And there was one funny thing that made me laugh when I was on public transportation is that he was cutting on the audience. He said, "You are the worst audience I've ever been exposed to."
Was that the Norwegian audience or somebody like that?
Yes. Okay, yes.
Yeah.
It was somewhere foreign. It wasn't in the United States, but it was just so
That's
funny.
right.
I mean, like, where have you ever heard an entertainer get in front? You're the worst audience I ever been in front of.
You're dead. You Scandinavian people are dead. What's wrong with you? Yeah. That's pretty good, eh? Did your band ever do that, Roxy, when you were in the nightclub? Say, you're the worst dancers I've ever seen in a nightclub. Did you ever do that, Roxy? No, you don't do that. In Mexico, you get killed. But it's pretty amazing what he would say to people. And he would argue with people. Go ahead.
Yes, in this Barres concert, he's in one of the intermissions because they have to change the furniture. Like he says, the instruments have to be moved around and changed and all this. There is a rock audience, and some people are being rude and shouting, and Zappa says, "Yeah, you are very rude," and he says, "But that's good. It's you rude people that have to listen to this." Yes. And he was like, "You can be rude when I'm standing here, but then when they start playing, just shut up."
That's right. Well, that's what he was always very
like,
sensitive.
Yeah. Take everything out. Take everything. You can say it when I'm here, but if you do that when they're playing, I'm really pissed off.
Right. He was very sensitive to any little disturbance in the audience. You'll hear him in many bootlegs. Some little guy way back in the 30s row goes, "Wait!" And he'll stop the music and go, "What'd you say?" And the guy would go, "Ah!" And he'd say something like, "Sorry, you'll hurt your throat. Calm down."
But
which actually,
in a way, in that concert, you can see he's like you, like Ian says, you won't stop until everybody gets it. He's really trying
that's right.
to tell the people why he considers this composer so important, what is the importance of this, and telling them, he had to stop for 25 years, and we're going to play 5 of his 10 compositions. So shut up.
I've occasionally been known to do that on Payday, right? When you guys get carried away, shut up, you fucking idiots. Remember when Ian started to play the sound from the cold fusion
for your education?
August 30th.
Keep that from you, and I'm bringing it to you.
August 30th, 2014. You look it up in the archives. Ian starts playing the sound, and you guys are just babbling away. And I say, "You fucking idiots! You're hearing the most incredible technology." But, "Oh no, you guys get both off your fucking opinions. You don't even know what's going on. So shut up and listen." So yes,
yes, but he did that also to prove that the industry says people is sort of stupid and they need to get low culture because they don't get high culture. And he was saying, no, they just don't have access to that. If they had the choice, they would choose better things. So he was trying to make a point really by organizing these type of things. And then he wanted to record many contemporary musicians right, because he thought many composers were not being played right, by the traditional classical musicians.
Yeah, they weren't playing, even doing the classics correctly, which is, McLuhan had the same criticism for Shakespeare theater, that people didn't know how to do Shakespeare the way it was done in the 1600s or 1500s. 19th century literacy fucked it up.
Let's play the Barres. I think it's important to listen to this musical.
I was going to add something there just before we play it. You were she's shouting at in 1970 Alyssa says she didn't know Zappa was a composer. All the early albums, which you don't get to see unless you get a CD, and they're probably on the CD, but this quote may not be on the CDs. But Alyssa, the major quote, the only quote on every early album was from Edgar Varese, "The present-day composer refuses to die." So there was Zappa saying, "I'm a fucking composer, and I refuse to die. And I'm here to do whatever composers thought they were doing." McLuhan would say, "Be an anti-environment, and you're not going to stop me, and I'm going to figure out how to get through to you people."
That's so poignant, because I was just going to bring up the provoking that Ben talked about in a few different ways so far, that shows that he was really present, that he was trying to provoke his audience, trying to provoke the listeners, joking with his band. It's similar to what you do, Bob, on Payday. It's about being able to surf whatever provoking comes into my reality. I can surf it in that moment, and I can play with it, or I can harmonize with it. That is part of the taking the power and enjoying the poise that you get from just relaxing and not being so worried about everything. Yeah.
McLuhan called it programming the environment.
The anti-environment point and being provocative and provoking, playing the record and seeing what people would react. That's kind of like just be awake. Like, wake up in your life. Check out what, like you say, Bob, instead of just being in the headphones all the time, observe your environment. That's provoking yourself to paying attention. So that's another way that Zappa was sort of a John the Baptist for Iondom, because this constant provoking himself and others in different ways is really fun and relevant to notice.
Yes, and he just
that describes you completely. That also describes you completely, Bob. The present-day composer who refuses to die.
Yeah, literally, I ain't fucking died. Eat this stuff and you can be like me. You won't have to die. But this teacher role...
You don't have to be at the Père Lachaise.
Yes, that's right. I was there to wipe out that cemetery. And you guys probably know.
You will never be there.
Yeah, so Roxy we put it up, last week, she put it up, and within a day or so, she got a email from Vimeo. They selected it as one of the best of the day, selected by the staff. It got extra attention. Me walking around.
It's not corrected, but it had like 200 views.
Great video.
But it's not the final one.
Really? Would you say it had 200 views, Roxy?
Yes.
Well, that's tremendous. We usually get 3 views. Bert, Alyssa, and Michael, and Carolyn. We don't even get 11 listeners. So Ion ripped me off, and he tries to provoke people. So he tells them to look up words in Google, which is an updating of Zappa on his first album, telling people to drop out and go to the library. Get yourself an education.
That's so good.
Yeah,
just wiki it. Just go to the library.
Yeah. So in the old days, you had to go to the library. So in 1970, after he broke up the Mother's Invention, I always kept track of the pop culture, looking at Hit Parader and the youth magazines to see any articles on Zappa, and I would find them and collect them. There was one in early 1970, and I'm saying, Jesus, he's in a classroom. He's in a high school or something. And that's the vibe. You can't fully tell what it is, but he was, I found out later, occasionally going to local high schools and educating them. This was when he didn't have his band, because he had broken them up. This is late 69, early 70. He continued teaching, going to high school and lecturing people, which is almost his whole agenda. So then years later, when I discussed Zappa running for president with the Evergreens said it'd be very hard for Zappa to make president because it's a Big Brother seriously controlled operation. But they said Zappa would make a tremendous local congressman, assemblyman, city hall guy, and probably get to the level of being mayor, but he'd be really good at that level. So there's Frank with his civics responsibility. He said the only course he ever had an interest in high school was civics, and he did well in civics, but so he kept doing his civics education. So he was an old-fashioned, responsible citizen in the old-fashioned way, on top of his patina of creativity. That was like McLuhan. McLuhan teaching, regular English courses during the day, but on the weekend he'd tear it up and become a manipulative satirist and freak everybody out. That's what Frank would do. He'd take a break.
Yeah.
So.
Let's listen to Barres, just the start of the concert, not the whole piece.
That's one thing I've learned about Roxy. She is a teacher, a high school teacher, a college teacher. She's didactic. Yeah, so we went through it.
No, because I think it's really important to listen to Frank presenting Barres at Ionization.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to click on the YouTube link and then make sure Soundflower is on. Okay, that's there. Soundflower. Output. Soundflower. Then the volume is up. This should work. It says Frank Zappa, a musical tribute to Edgar Varese with 9,184 views. And this would be 30 years later. But YouTube's only been going for 10 years. So, but this happened in the early 80s. I got it right.
Oh my God.
This music before, I'll give you a little bit of information.
Okay. Since we're laughing, I'm going to replay it a little bit, so we might have missed something. Now, this is April 17, 1981. Yeah, April 17, 1981. It's in the Palladium, which Carol and I were in a few months before. Yeah, Palladios, right. And it's Cold Fusion, isn't Palladium? Isn't that the name of the mineral? Or the element? Palladium?
Palladium is an element, yeah.
Yes. It's a key factor in Coldplay. So we were in the Palladium on November 1980, and Zappa did 3 concerts. So we were in New York for that, and then this is happening 6 months later in that building. A lot of rock stuff took place in the Palladium in that period. So I'm just going to rewind it just so we don't miss any of the words from our laugh down. Okay.
Shut the fuck up. Hey, now look. For those of you who have never heard this music before, I'll give you a little bit of information about each piece while they change the stage over, because it's a different instrumentation for each piece. So I'll be back periodically to keep you informed of what's going on. This is a basic introduction to the music of Edgar Varese for people who don't know anything about it. You dig it? It's good. A man of good taste. I know there are some people here who already know what's going on and like this music and appreciate it. That's right, Ionizations is going to be the first piece. Yay. What? No, we're not having a dance contest tonight, sorry. Wish we could, but no, it's not going to happen. Now look. That's right. Come on, get it over with now, because if you make that noise when they play, I'll be really mad at you. All right. Quiet. It's Ionizations, and it was first performed in 1933, and he started working on it in 1931. And when it was played, that's my name, shut up. And when it was played,
This is really good. This is good. I've never heard this, Roxy. It's a good find. I mean, he's telling me. He's
now
like,
that you stop, I would like to say something. He's bringing contemporary serious music to a rock audience, and then he does the opposite when he works with Ensemble Modern. He brings popular carnival music to this high-educated, highbrow.
Yes. He's
Yeah.
a mini anti-environment in the room. He's a mini anti-environment to whatever's there.
That's so
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
Yeah. And now he's telling these people who keep yelling out, Zappa! He's dealing with the electronic effect. He's trying to retrieve an update of visual culture. He says, look, I'll be really mad if you make any noises during this thing. I mean,
That was one of the big criticism of Adorno. He said people who listen to low culture music don't even listen.
Right.
Right.
Intellectuals analyze and really concentrate and pay attention. But Zappa is trying to educate das Volk, the people, like Bob.
Yes, we've come here. Now, the Adorno, he says, okay, the pop culture, they don't listen to their electronic music, to the electric rock and roll and all that. But McLuhan comes on and says that you can't have a literate mental response to rock.
Right.
He said it's like foam rubber that presses up against you. And Zappa called it bone conduction, Adorno didn't recognize this is not literate culture, and you don't put down people for not responding in a literate way. It's a tactile kinetic thing that you see McLuhan in a nightclub, and they got the Go-Go Girls in the background, and he's talking over it. This is a pretty popular YouTube video, and he's saying this is like foam rubber. It presses up against you. It doesn't happen through your ears. It happens against your chest and torso is how you receive this music. And then he finishes...
Amplification.
Oh, yeah, amplify. Yes. Which is a line in Finney's Wake that he blurred with his own writing, so you didn't know whether he was saying it or Joyce said it. That's in Explorations around number 5 in mid-50s. So in this video, he stops talking, he's explained it, and the Go-Go Girls are going on, and he says to the cameraman, Are they going to turn this down? I can't be kidding. Well, I've had enough of this shit. I don't want to hear the foam rubber anymore. He asked them to turn it off. Have you seen that, Alyssa?
I have. No, I want to. I haven't yet. I want to. I'm going to.
Yeah. Okay, so, Roxy, you're pointing out that Zappa is being not visual culture, but he's saying, hey, we're in a different modality here, and you need to become flexible in different cultural modalities, know how to experience what's happening here in this context, not just be a knee-jerk, simple person, rhythm addict. Barry never called it.
He did that to the to the audience and to the musicians he was working with, like I compare it to you because you also make us look into everything. And we are not communists or monarchists or whatever. To LaRouche and into this and into this. We can look into everything. We don't create conspiracy, and we have fun. And I was telling you, I don't care if people think we're freaks, because, like Zappa said, to progress there has to be
mutations.
We are freaks. We are. We are freaks.
And
the
I got the ultimate
of the norm is what makes things progress, and if they don't get it, that's their problem. I don't care.
Right. I got the ultimate compliment,
like
Roxy. The ultimate compliment was the guy, we're reading from his text, Greg Russo. He was all enthusiastic about coming on the show, and then somebody got to him, the CIA, says, you cannot go on Bob's show. The Zappa world must not know about Bob. If you go on there, people know you and your book, and then they'll find out about Bob. That cannot be done. So he dropped out, and he never even answered me to tell me that he was dropping out. So I just said, okay, if you don't respond to this email, I know that you've chickened out. I insult him. I call him a chicken.
Yes, and Barrett himself was so attacked that he stopped composing for 25 years. And he, in an interview, he says, all innovators were like the punks of their time. Now we see, we look back, and for us, they're the classicals, the people that.
Yeah, they're now religion. They're now religious icons. These punks.
They had the same. Had to fight the same.
Same problem.
Yeah.
The same anger of the audience.
Working on Facebook groups, and people will just chicken out and care about the reputation. But we don't care about the reputation. Let's listen to Zappa. Let's listen to Zappa.
Those people are only in for the money. So here's this guy celebrating Zappa, and he doesn't even recognize the Zappa tradition continues in a new form right here, and he will not participate, just like the stupid McLuhanites. The art must change. The art has to come into as a new form because the media environment changes. That's the best explanation. So manipulative satire always adopts a different form.
And that is one of the definitions of art. Because when we discuss what is art, what is high culture, what is low culture, at the end, what presents is art. What goes beyond the trend, the fashion of the time, the marketing of the time. And
the hypnosis of the time.
That's why they make a festival of American music, and they play film music, Zappa, Gershwin, and also John Cage and Philip Glass and all others. But Zappa is now recognized as an important contemporary American composer.
Yeah. He got his goal. So the people in 1913, they hear Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, and they riot. Why do people riot at a nice musical presentation? Well, because the people are conditioned by the technological milieu of their late 19th century, they need art that provides some kind of relief from the pressures of their environment. So usually it's older, familiar forms. So the movies and telephone comes in, changes the world, the people aren't aware of it, so then a guy writes music in tuned rhythms of the new electric spaces, and he makes a new art, a new kind of sound, and it rubs the people wrong. The people can't stop. They say, this is not a proper soothing environment. And then they riot and get pissed off at what Stravinsky did. But then because they're going to be changed by the movie, radio, and telephone over the next 30, 40 years, and they're going to become a different kind of people, then they start liking Stravinsky 40 years later, while a new technology, television, comes in and starts changing even that dynamic. So a guy like Zappa shows up to play the present effects, and he's considered ugly. And, of course, he knew that, and he said, we are ugly. He used to celebrate it. He says, you beautiful people, you fashionable people, you Jane Fondas, Catherine Deneuve, you better watch out because there's more of us than you. There's more ugly people.
That's so good.
Yeah, so there it is again. Nobody knows what art's for. Then McLuhan came on, could see enough of the changes that he could explain it. He explained it, so then they tried to put him in jail for explaining where art comes from, and that meant all the Gutenberg arts were obsolete because they could be explained. Now the new effects from the global theater, nobody understood that was the new art. And so what did Zappa call himself? He called himself Intercontinental Absurdities, United Mutations. A lot of his terms fit with the intuition of the global theater. Intercontinental Absurdities was another, or did I already say that? But it's interesting the language Zappa would use. So you have this TV show, Welcome Back, Kotter, which probably started about 1970. The young disco guy, John the Rebel. What was that guy called?
John the Revelator.
What?
Yeah,
wait.
nice.
John the Revelator.
Oh, yeah, Rebel later. John, Pulp Fiction.
I like
Who's
it,
that
Roxy.
guy? Pulp Fiction. John, the famous 80s actor.
The actor?
Travolta. Yeah, John Travolta. Yeah. So he's in Welcome Back, Kotter as a kid actor, and this is a hip high school teacher or something. So this is what it was for me. Because I could see the present, or knew of it, I'd see this TV show, wouldn't watch it too much, but I'd see it, and I'd think of Zappa being in the classroom. I said, look at that. The people are given the rearview mirror. They should have a show on Zappa being the high school teacher. So I would always see, no one would look at John Travolta or Welcome Back, Kotter and think of Zappa. I was living in the present. I would think of Zappa. I said, Zappa could do this better. You know? I'm just showing you how once you live in the present, you're responding to things with different imagery. I can say that surely there's not one person in the world who looked at Welcome Back, Kotter, the popular TV show, and said, no, Zappa would get better as a high school teacher than these guys.
Yeah, that's like people looking at the political environment today and not being able to really see it.
Yeah, right, exactly. And did you? Well, let me just add this point before the next point. But because I looked in, I tell you, I'm 45 or something years old, and I'm looking at Hit Parader magazine, teen magazines. I assure you, anybody else of my generation was not looking at teen magazines, but I was looking. But I was on the lookout for when Zappa would infiltrate and show up, and there was that picture of him teaching in high school. And that's what primed me to have that image in response to Welcome Back, Kotter. Then the second point is that President Trump, is bringing in legislation to diminish the bullshit of vaccination. That's one of the most incredible things if he does that, if he pulls that off. That's the biggest service you could do for American society as a president, to actually get control of the vaccination disease plague and give people at least a choice about it. That's pretty amazing. And that's what he's doing.
Yeah.
So you look at my Facebook page, you'll see Tim Boland, a very good activist, a friend of Carolyn. He writes the thing, and he's part of making the legislation, and he has in the headline, shriek, shriek, shriek. All the liberals are outraged at whatever Trump does. And they so merge with the regular medicine, with the science icon, the science, what do you call those things, idol worship, the idol worship of science. They don't even understand what it needs to be done in vaccination. They think, this is horrible. Trump is anti-science. We need more vaccinations. So, that's a side point there. Go ahead.
Yes, but at the same time, there is a new state of matter, the time crystals, and all physics don't apply anymore. So that's the thing with science.
That's right. It's always...
And that's exactly what Ion is saying. Is no longer effective.
Applicable,
yeah.
Yeah, like I could say my chart.
Let's go back to Zappa and ionization.
Right. Now send me that video. I can't find the one that you apparently sent me on the crystals. If you can find it, send it to me.
Bob, keep playing the other. Are you going to keep playing the
Yeah, we're going to do that. We're going to do that, but just shut up. I'm teaching you shit.
Zappa,
You ought to say more Zappa. I'm saying stuff way better at Zappa, okay? Come on, let's calm down here.
That's my name.
But what was it? What were we just saying about
science?
Science. Oh yeah, crystals. That's the subtitle of my tiny note chart. The spinning clothing crystals have danced the hex advertisement. The word crystals right in there. So I'm sure that's what they're picking up on.
and it's really like that because this new state of matter are crystals, but they're like gelatin. They don't stop moving, and those are the dancing crystals, really.
That's right. Very good. Okay, so let's continue. Hope it's loud enough.
Poorly. They thought that this piece was horrible.
I'm going to rewind slightly, just so we don't miss anything.
1933, and he started working on it in 1931, and when it was played, that's my name, shut up, and when it was played, critics reviewed this piece very poorly. They thought that this piece was horrible because, what else? Everything else. This piece is written, I think, 32.
Well, that's awesome. We got to stop this.
And
really
he
good.
is not amused.
No, but he's funny though. They go, "What else?" And he goes, "Everything else." He's fitting at ease. He's including everything. Did you get that? They yelled out something. He goes, "They go, what else?" And he goes, "Everything else." And, okay, 1933. 1933 is an ionizing date because that's when the Chinese saved the American economy by buying up a lot of gold or something. I get it mixed up with the Federal Reserve bonds. Whatever they did, Ion cites that as the beginning of the Chinese takeover. That's in 1933. That's when the mountain comes in, the good guys.
Wow.
And that's the guys who promote ion. So ionization technically was indicating the political move behind the scenes in on the second economy. And did you say, Zappa says, they did a lousy performance because they didn't know what they were fucking playing for. Did you hear him say that? The guys in 33 were so fucked up they didn't understand Perez that they did a lousy performance. He talked about the invisible environment. Yeah,
that's true. And well, that was one of his of the things in his agenda to perform some contemporary composers right.
That's right. He wanted to show how it should have been done. So somebody yells out, "Zappa!" And he goes, "Yeah, that's right. That's my name. Shut up." It's quite funny. Okay, I'm going to go back and do that again. Did you want to say something else, Roxy?
No, let's listen to this.
Okay.
He's like a middle school teacher, Bob. He's being like a middle school teacher. Yeah.
He's in the ghetto. He's in the ghetto with the local juvenile delinquents. And he's trying. But it's backward. They actually love him. They're not against him. They love him, but they're loving the wrong guy. This is a different Frank Zappa that's now happening. You know, the other electronic yokels, McClune called them, they don't understand that it's a different Zappa. They think that, can you imagine the whatever classical music audience was there, what they were thinking of these animals yelling out, "Zappa!" You know, you never see that in the Leonard Bernstein concert, you know, Bernstein! But like, if I ever go to a classical concert,
and then
if I ever go,
the presenter just say, "Shut up!"
It's like a riot. If I ever go to the Maui Cultural Center, they play some classical music. Whoever the conductor is, it might be able to be some Japanese guy, Mr. Huakawa. I'm going to yell, "Huakawa!" I'm going to start yelling out the guy's name. And I'll be immediately kicked out. And I won't have to listen to it. Okay.
1933, and he started working on it in 1931. And when it was played, that's my name, shut up. And when it was played, critics reviewed this piece very poorly. They thought that this piece was horrible because, what else? Everything else. This piece is written in percussion, 32 different percussion instruments. And, right, hey. You are going to get a chance to hear some sounds that you don't often get to hear anyplace. During his lifetime, he only wrote 10 pieces that are published and remain. There's one that we don't know where it went, and another one that's unfinished. But all that survives, by what? Oh, let me finish what I'm trying to tell you. Look. If he has 10 pieces that he wrote in his whole life, and he lived to be around 86 years old, tonight we're playing about half of everything that this man wrote during his lifetime. And this is a special concert, and please don't misbehave and enjoy it. Right. I'd like to introduce you now to Joel Tone and the orchestra of our time with our first rocking teenage number, Ionizations by Edgar Varese.
Now they're quiet, eh?